all protocols being observed, interrogating sexual violence in Guyana. Why isn't the sexual task force functioning? Who's responsible? When will it function? The Sexual Offences Act will be 20 years old next year. The Sexual Offences Task Force is an integral part of that act. I sit on the Sexual Offences Task Force, but it remains something that appears to be in stillbirth. It functions sometimes, you have one meeting, and then nothing else happens because you have ministers who have critical role on that task force, and they are abdicating their duties. We cannot let this continue. We have to do more to protect Guyana's children and society. A survey will soon be released to the public, and the data from this survey is quite frightening. What the data will show is that Guyana has an accommodation syndrome. If you don't know what it is, please Google it. It means then we have become so ingrained in what is abnormal, it has become the norm, and so we tend to do nothing. We are very apathetic. I listened to the learned Chancellor, and I say Chancellor because I believe you should get that position, ma'am, with all the benefits, and you too, Madam Chief Justice, I stand here to advocate for you. We have two powerful women in our society acting. What does it say to our respect for women? And sitting on the Women and Gender Equality Commission, I feel strongly about this. It's time to confirm them. In the opening of the Sexual Offences Court in Berbice, you lamented the fact that the majority of cases there were for rape of children, and that brought tears to my eyes. You also lamented the fact when there was the opening of the execrable criminal assizes, again, most of the cases there appear to be that of children. What has happened to a society whereby there appears to be an appetite for children? I'd like to bring to you a real case, and bear with me. On Tuesday, a jury found Mr. Kevin Rankin not guilty of sodomizing and murdering his 2-year-old niece. Nearly 3 years ago at Haslington, I'm reading from a case, No Justice for Kimani. This is in 2016, East Coast Demerara. Mr. Rankin, who was 15 years old at the time of the incident, had been arrested by the police after it was established that the dead toddler, Kimani Phillips, had been in his sole care for about an hour before her death. He was then released, but was rearrested after the infant's cause of death was confirmed by the result of a post-mortem examination. How did Kimani die? On October 21st, 2013, the 2-year-old was pronounced dead on arrival at the Georgetown Public Hospital, where she had been taken by her 18-year-old cousin and her aunt. The child had previously been declared dead at the Navacalis Health Center by a nurse who could find no pulse, no heartbeat, but her relatives, who were perhaps in denial, still took her to the health facility. The PME, which was later conducted on the child's body, found evidence that she had been sodomized before death. According to the PME report, Kimani succumbed due to hemorrhage and shock from multiple abdominal injuries. The pathologist found that the child had been subjected to anal penetration, which left behind fresh samples of blood. The abdominal trauma was a result of anal penetration, which caused massive internal injuries to her spleen, liver, and anus. In addition, there were injuries to her neck, her head, neck, and blunt trauma consistent with having been hit, compression, or a fall. The pathologist also surmised that the infant could have been pressed down, thus restricting the flow of blood, preventing her from breathing. Can there be any worse way for a 2-year-old to die? The extent of the injuries she sustained indicate that she would have been in unimaginable pain while they were being inflicted. The PME established that Kimani was merely 2 years old, had been brutally ripped open by whoever penetrated her. Further, there was no doubt that it had happened right before she died. There was no way an infant could have lived more than a few minutes with such tremendous injuries. Who killed Kimani? All of the circumstantial evidence pointed to her then 15-year-old uncle, Mr. Kevin Rankin. About an hour prior to her death, he had been called and asked to give her a bath. At that point, she had been alive and well. The next time she was seen was after she was either dying or already dead. No one else had any access to her. It was on the basis of this the uncle was arrested. While considerations would have been given to the fact that Mr. Rankin was a minor, there is no excusing of what can only be described as extremely shabby detective work. At the time of his arrest, Mr. Rankin would have been a person of interest in the child's death because he was the last person to have seen her alive. And while there was as yet no PME report, the police would have had an idea as to how Kimani died. Therefore, in keeping with proper protocols, Mr. Rankin should have been examined for signs of trauma consistent with the damage done to his 2-year-old niece, samples taken from him for DNA testing. At the time of his second arrest, Mr. Rankin was a suspect and he was subsequently charged with the crime. Again, there was no moves by the police to obtain DNA samples from the accused, which could have been compared with samples from the dead infant. The results of such a comparison would have firmly established either Mr. Rankin was responsible for Kimani's death or that he had nothing to do with it. One variable would have ensured a conviction. The other would have seen the police widen their investigation. This is pretty basic detective work. And there is no reason why it should not have been done. There was no eyewitness. As emerged during the trial, the 18-year-old cousin who entrusted Kimani to Mr. Rankin's care so he could bathe her and who later took Kimani to seek medical attention was the closest thing to that. However, she gave conflicting evidence because she said she was reluctant to implicate her cousin, Mr. Rankin. The police ought to have done its evidence gathering independent of the witness. That being said, the circumstantial evidence was solid. The defense had no way of disproving that A, Kimani had been in Mr. Rankin's care and no one else prior to her death, and B, Kimani was so sexually abused, so viciously it caused her death. The police failings aside, one cannot help but wonder if the jury's not guilty verdict really was based on the testimony presented in court. One hopes too that the Director of Public Prosecutions would file an appeal in this case. A trusting 2-year-old has had her life brutally snuffed out. There should be justice for her. I stand here to bat for Kimani. Kimani died in 2013 and she got no justice, but her spirit keeps coming to me and saying that I must speak on her behalf. I remember many years ago calling for a sexual offenders registry. Where is the registry? It is based on all of what has been happening in Guyana, the low and no convictions that occasioned the creation of Citizens Against Rape in 2014, an NGO dedicated to raising the awareness and trying to advocate that there be justice within the system for Guyana's children. I would like to note that the sexual offenses court that is now functioning has done well to actually bring some justice cases from long years ago. Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice delayed is justice denied. It should not take so long for a child to actually get justice within our system. I also remember vividly the child who had to walk in all alone, this is in Region 10, to actually tell the probation officers of her rape by her own father. No one in the community stood up for her. She was left all alone, but she did it, and he was arrested and charged and is serving time. We must do more to protect Guyana's children. We have a duty and a responsibility. Wherever it is occurring, it must not be allowed to occur and to happen. Only today I've been in box to ask a question. There is a stepfather who is troubling a 15-year-old and what to do. Not enough spaces for all the children in our midst who are suffering, and we wonder why Guyana has a high suicide rate. They are suffering in silence, they are suffering sometimes loud, and yes, I am a survivor of child sexual abuse as well as gender-based violence. And today, the 25th of July, is Orange Day. Every day of the month, every 25th day of every month is Orange Day. I wear orange to raise awareness that we need to stop the violence against women and girls. I thank you.